everyone, it's Ben and Tess from Trekitt, and we're out here on Butcher Common today to give you an inside look into the NEMO Dagger OSMO tent. Over the course of this video we'll go over the features of the tent. You get a landing zone, what it is, what it's intended for. It's designed for lightweight backpacking and anything we really like about it and any other features that we think you should know. So we'll be going over everything about this tent. I'll be getting inside it. We'll be inflating a sleeping mat with it as well, so to show the overall space inside the tent. But we'll go over the course of this video and hopefully Tess is going to stay outside and not try to come in. So the Dagger OSMO 2 from NEMO, as the name might suggest, is a two-person tent. It's designed for lightweight backpacking, so it is a lighter weight option, but it's still incredibly spacious. So the internal space of this is pretty generous for most two-man tents. It's probably bigger than most two-mans from other brands, but we'll get into that a little bit later when we actually go inside the tent. But it's designed to be lightweight yet protective for everything from three-season backpacking to slightly more casual use. But the space and airiness and airflow of this tent are what really make it quite practical for all those applications. One really important thing about any tent is how it's constructed. NEMO have chosen to use a unified pole design for this. They're using DAC Featherlight NSL poles, and this pole is one single unified pole because it's all constructed together. So you've got the grey poles that form a Y at either end with this central spine over the top, and then you've got this green cross member here that is also connected. So this tent is really quick to put up, and it's an all-in-one pole that then clips to the inner first. So it is an inner pitch first tent. In this case, in this instance today, we have used a footprint. The footprint, as far as I'm aware, is something that is not included with this tent by default, but it is something that we recommend using to enhance and extend the lifespan of your tent and also make the tent a little bit easier to keep clean and keep on top of. The footprint acts as a protectant underneath, but it also prevents any dirt or detritus from hitting the underside of the bathtub of this tent. So this portion of the tent here and underneath there will keep you in much better condition, and you can always wash a footprint much easier than you can the entire inner of the tent. When it comes to actually putting this tent up, all of the poles, as I say, are in one and they all just slot together. And then in the four corners of the inner of this tent, you have hooks and a ball and socket joint. So the ball and socket is what goes onto the end of these poles here. So I can get this one out, and there's just a ball on the end here and then the socket on the actual thing there at the bottom, which is connected to the bottom of the tent. So that just clips in on all the four corners, and once it's in place with all those four, you then have these plastic clips that go over the top of the poles and hold everything nice and taut under tension. At this point you would throw the fly sheet over like we had on earlier, and the fly sheet again hooks over the end of these brackets here. So there are clipping points on the end here that Harry will get a close-up shot of, that we hook on the four corners, and then you peg out the rest of the tent, and then you get tension on the doors and things like that to get the fly sheet nice and taut, because a taut tent is a dry tent. You do have pegging points on the four corners, and you have two pegging points on the doors, so that you have that ability to change how much of the tent inner you have exposed. If you are really brave, possibly not in the UK to be perfectly honest with you, because conditions don't usually allow for it, but you can run this tent essentially as a bug net. So as a big old bug net, you get a little bit of protection and you get lots of airflow, but if it rains, you're going to get very wet. So for the UK, most of the time we recommend using it with the fly sheet, but if you're in a particularly hot place or we have a particularly long dry spell, you can run this tent as is in this configuration and still have a little bit of protection. One great thing about the construction of this tent is it is a freestanding self-supporting tent. So once you've got the poles and the inner put together, you can also do this with the fly sheet on, assuming you haven't already pegged it into the ground, is you can pick this up, move this around. So if conditions are a little bit shonky, you're somewhere where it's not ideal conditions, you can pitch the tent in a more sheltered area, potentially under some cover where you wouldn't ideally be sleeping. Once the tent is in this state, you can pick it up and move it. Obviously with that, this is quite a large thing, so the wind can catch it, so you've got to make sure you hold on to it and you want to keep it low to the ground. You don't want to be lifting it up, raising it into the air, because it might fly away and then you've got no tent at all. It's very light. One key thing to mention about the Dagger OSMO is the Osmo, which is the fly sheet. What that's made from is NEMO's own Osmo fabric. NEMO have created a composite fabric that is designed to be very durable for its weight and also maintain its shape even when it gets wet. So one thing that siliconized nylon tents in particular can tend to struggle from is when they get wet, the material tends to stretch and sag a little bit, so you will have to adjust tension. NEMO have tried to compensate for that by making it 3 times less likely to do that, meaning that once this tent is pitched, it will stay nice and taut, nice and rigid. Like even now with the door open, hopefully you can hear that tent is quite nice and taut. The other thing with Osmo fabrics is they are all PFC and PFAS free, which is really good from an environmental standpoint, and they are all woven from 100% recycled materials. So it's really nice and environmentally conscious there on that front. NEMO have gone one step further with that with the pole bag, which is somewhere inside the tent at the moment, but that is made from recycled bottles. So they don't dye it or do anything to that, so that's why it is white, which might seem like a bit of a strange choice for an outdoor product. But the reason they do that is to cut down on that environmental impact by not adding any extra dyes, any extra water than is needed to that process. So one thing that's really fantastic about the NEMO Dagger OSMO is just the sheer amount of space in here. So being 6'3", I normally struggle a little bit when it comes to sitting up in tents. So I am a little bit crouched here, but I can also sit fully upright on a mat quite comfortably, no issues at all. And part of that is from the design of the tent, because you've got very high ends, high sides. But NEMO have also made this tent probably a little bit bigger than most of the competition. Think the likes of your MSR Hubba Hubbas, tents of that ilk, all very similar in terms of the way they're constructed, the way that they're put together. But NEMO have made this tent pretty big. We've actually got 2 mats in here at the moment that are both rectangular. One of them is a Mountain Equipment Aerostat long. It's actually my personal mat that I use quite often. And then we've got an Exped Dura 5R as well, but this one is a medium wide. So we do have, with the mats edge to edge, we do still probably have about another 10 centimeters gap between the 2 mats. So you could get away with 2 of the wide mats, but there is comfortably space in here. Admittedly, I'm on the shorter mat here because it's further away from the camera. For me to lie down, my feet are touching the end there, but not uncomfortably so, and I've still got a good amount of headroom up here. So this tent really is spacious and will fit someone much taller than me as well. With the Dagger OSMO, there are a few features that are potentially unique to NEMO, as well as some that you might sort of know and love from other tents. One pretty obvious one is that the door rolls back nicely. You do also have a 2-way zip on it, so you can ventilate at the top as well as just opening it like we've got here. This door does also roll away right the way back to a second tie-in point here, so you can have completely open sides. You can actually do that on both sides, so the tent is entirely open on the one side, which we'll get a shot of a little bit later. Each side of the tent has its own entrance, so behind me here we have exactly the same setup, it's just mirrored. So if there are 2 of you in here, you each get your own entrance. If you're in it by yourself, you get a wet entrance and a dry entrance. You get a landing zone, which is something that is an optional extra for the tent that you don't have to carry with you. It's included with the tent, but you don't have to carry it with you and use it. But it just clips in, clips out. This is essentially a useful storage area. At the moment, I've got stuff sacks and things like that in there, but it's useful for storing a rucksack and things. Essentially adds a little bit more of a footprint to your tent so that you can store things without worrying too much. You do also just get the rest of a normal vestibule, so I've got my boots in here at the moment. And then the other thing is this door also rolls back, so you can open it so that I can actually talk to you like this. But if I didn't want you to be there, I can just simply unhook and zip back up, and then we've got this bug mesh here. So the zip is split, which I'm having fun with now because I'm a bit far away from it, but the zip is split, which means that you can open just the bottom part, reach out, grab something from the landing zone without opening the zip completely and letting all the bugs in. Moving inside the tent, again, this is mirrored at both ends, so we'll focus on this end here, but it's the same at the head end of the tent as well, is you have these nightlight pockets from NEMO. So these are a good place to put a lantern. This lantern's actually a little bit big, but we've got another place for this, or a head torch in there. And this panel is a different colour, so it helps diffuse the light a little bit, so it's a little bit kinder to your eyes. But if you want to do a little bit of reading, or you're just sat in the tent after dark, you can diffuse the light a little bit by popping it in there, and it means you don't have to have a head torch on. Alternatively, if you've got a lantern a little bit more like this black diamond that we've got here, you can use some of the attachment points up inside the tent and hook in a lantern, simple as that. There is also the option to rig up your own sort of gear loft with this using accessory cords, so you can have a little washing line running across the top or something like that. But in this case, it's really useful to hold a little lantern so that you can have nice diffused light inside the tent. Other than the landing zone and the vestibules that you've got outside the tent, you do get a little bit of inbuilt storage. So they're on opposite corners, but you've got the low pockets here, which are a little bit bigger. And then on the opposite corners, so there's one in that corner as well, but you have a slightly smaller pocket as well. So again, useful for storing small things. So I can get a phone in that one quite comfortably, nice and easy. The bigger pocket is a little bit more suitable potentially for slightly bigger items, but again, equally useful. Popping a phone in, popping a book if you're finished reading for the night. It's just a nice, simple thing that's a nice addition to any tent like this, a little bit more storage. So while we've got this tent in this position here with both vestibules fully rolled back, it's also a good opportunity to talk about the ventilation of this tent, which helps cut down on the condensation. So you might notice that the fly sheet is cut a little bit high on the ends here. You do also have a little guying point there to hold it out. But essentially, underneath here, the bathtub of the inner of the tent is actually raised up slightly so that you get a bit of a protected vent. So airflow can come up underneath the fly sheet here, but you are still protected from the worst of the weather. But it's just a nice feature to keep the tent fully weatherproof, but also a little bit more breathable. That does restrict this tent to being more of a 3-season tent, and that's where NEMO really sort of peg it. And I think Tess has found something interesting. But with this higher cut fly sheet, it does certainly help with airflow and ventilation, and you can massively increase that depending on the weather by leaving the sides open as well. One thing that's very important to test is to double check the overall weight of the tent. The manufacturer recommended weight on this from NEMO, they reckon it will come in about 1.86 kilos. So I've got my scale set at 0. I'm just going to hook that on there, but it's coming in at 1.8. So NEMO are about spot on with that. The other option that NEMO also suggests is they have effectively a trail weight, where you can strip out a little bit of the extra weight from this by dropping the 2 extra pegs that come with it that are designed to be used with the guy lines that are also included with this. That and dropping the other stuff sacks and things from inside this, you can get it down to around the 1.5 kilo mark, but honestly at 1.8 kilos it's already a very lightweight tent, and we'd recommend using those guy lines, especially if the weather is a little bit untoward. So that about wraps up the NEMO Dagger OSMO 2. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about it or possibly purchase this tent, there'll be a link on the screen now to find out a little bit more about it. If you're new to camping, there will also be a link on screen to some of our other videos, particularly one about how to reduce condensation in your tent. But hopefully that's given you everything you need to know about the NEMO Dagger OSMO 2. I'm going to pack this tent away now and we're going to carry on. See you in the next one.